Chapter 37. The maidservant named Xiao Huan would sometimes think about what kind of life the son-in-law led before he came up the mountain. Who was in his family, whether he was married, whether he had a girl in his heart. Later, as they lived together for a long time, she gradually understood some things. Some of the information that Li Yi unintentionally revealed made the maidservant dispel some of her assumptions, but she was not so sure about most things. As early as the night of Chinese Valentine's Day, when Li Yi became very strange, the maidservant already had some guesses in her heart. If two people love each other for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? She had pestered Sister Qin, the only one in the village who had read books, to explain the meaning of these two sentences to her. She only remembered that Sister Qin had said at that time that son-in-law was probably a person with a story. She looked at the painting in her hand again. Looking at the beautiful girl, the maidservant could not help but let her imagination run wild. Could it be that this was son-in-law's former sweetheart? One was a dignified scholar, the other was a charming beauty. They should have been a pair that would be envied by the world, helping each other in times of hardship and accompanying each other for a lifetime. But suddenly, there was a great change. The scholar was kidnapped by the mountain bandits and became the husband of the village's stronghold, while the beauty sat alone in her boudoir, washing her face with tears. Although it could not be seen normally, son-in-law's heart must have been very bitter, right? Thinking of this, an inexplicable feeling suddenly surged in the young girl's heart. She felt a lump in her throat and her heart tightened. Tears fell down her cheeks. "Xiao Huan, what's wrong?" A familiar voice suddenly sounded beside her. The young girl was startled. When she turned her head, she saw Lu Rui standing behind her. "Ah, second miss." She quickly reached out to wipe her tears and said, "Nothing, I accidentally squinted my eyes just now." "What is this?" Lu Rui looked at the seemingly familiar painting in her hand and looked over. A nap solved 1,000 worries. When Li Yi woke up the next day, it was almost lunchtime. Of course, he didn't have time to teach the naughty children, and no one paid him a salary. He didn't have enough motivation to work. Fortunately, it was up to him whether he went to school or not, and there were no restrictions. There was no one in the courtyard. Lu Rui should have gone out to practice. As for Lu Rui, Li Yi hadn't seen her since yesterday. He was used to her occasional disappearances. Xiao Huan was cooking in the kitchen. It was not appropriate for a man to wander around the kitchen all the time. Moreover, after a long time, Li Yi himself would get tired of it. As early as half a month ago, he had begun to consciously teach Xiao Huan some things about cooking. In short, she could not just casually throw something into the pot and cook it like before. Eating should be a kind of enjoyment, not as simple as filling the stomach. After washing up, he walked to the door and stretched his body. Breathing in the fresh air from the mountains, he immediately felt refreshed. The air wasn't polluted by industrialization. Every breath he took was filled with the smell of nature. It was extremely fresh and had a strong smell of meat. After carefully distinguishing it, Li Yi was sure that he didn't smell wrong. It was indeed the smell of meat. The smell didn't come from his own kitchen. Last night, he had told Xiao Huan to handle the meat himself. He wrinkled his nose and sniffed. Looking in the direction of the smell, he saw the naughty child from Master Fang's family walking over with a huge bowl in his hands. The naughty child walked up to Li Yi, holding the bowl, and said timidly, "Young master, my father asked me to bring this over." Seeing the big bowl of cooked meat in the naughty child's hands, Li Yi smiled and patted his head. He took the bowl from his hands. Although he didn't lack it, it was a kind gesture, so he couldn't refuse it. After completing the task his father gave him, the naughty child didn't even say, "Goodbye, young master," and ran home. Today, not only was there delicious rice, but there was also meat to eat. The naughty child's smile had already reached the corner of his mouth, and his heart had already flown home. Not only did Li Yi smell the strong smell of meat, but many people in the Willow Leaf village stood at the door and swallowed their saliva as they smelled the fragrance in the air. Looking at the situation in the village, even rice was a luxury. It had been a long time since the people in the village smelled the smell of meat. When they saw the naughty children strolling around the village with bowls of white rice and a layer of meat on top of the rice, everyone couldn't stay calm. Not to mention pork, even the richest family in the village couldn't be so extravagant with white rice. A group of landless tenant farmers actually ate better food than the people of the Liu family who had land. Many people couldn't help but stare at them. Thinking of what happened yesterday, some people finally realized that the things that Master Fong and his people brought back to the village were really food. A whole 10 stones of rice. For them, this was no less than an astronomical figure. Some people couldn't help but run to inquire about the news. When they came back, they were in a trance. They were worried that they didn't have a place to show off. When they were asked, Master Fong and his people naturally didn't hide anything and told them the whole story. When the news reached the ears of the people, it became a story of a powerful new son-in-law who easily exchanged a painting for 10 taels of silver. The meat and food were all bought by him. After hearing this piece of news, the crowd was left with nothing but deep shock. Among them, no one had seen what 10 taels of silver looked like. Previously, Fong's family was so poor that they didn't even have food to eat, but now they could eat rice and meat, which shocked them even more. At this time, the ones who regretted the most were the women who paid Li Yi to paint on the Chinese Valentine's Day. When they thought that the sky lamp they released was worth 10 taels of silver, their hearts were bleeding. Using 10 taels of silver to release the sky lamp was probably the most extravagant thing they had ever done in their lives. As for those who were originally from families similar to Master Fong and his people, they could only watch the people eat meat. They were filled with regret. They secretly regretted why they didn't stand on the side of Lu Rui and Lu Rui when everyone joined forces to attack the direct line of descent. Of course, there were also people who secretly thought that they should go down the mountain and kidnap a scholar. They wouldn't let him do anything and just lock him in his room to paint every day, but it was just a thought. If any scholar had this kind of ability to earn money, how could there be a poor scholar? No matter how jealous the direct line of descent and the others were, they had to admit, Lu Rui and Lu Rui had really picked up a treasure this time. Chapter 38. Li Yi did not know that he had become a treasure in some people's hearts. At this moment, he was taking inventory of the things he bought when he went down the mountain. Other than grain, meat, and some common vegetable seeds, he also bought a lot of seasonings that were used in cooking. He originally thought that the ancient people would be far inferior to the modern people in this aspect, but what Li Yi did not expect was that the seasonings of this era were actually more than what he had seen in the modern world. He was dazzled by the variety and simply bought a little of everything. After buying a lot of things, he spent more than half of the 10 taels of silver. There was still about 3 taels of silver left, but Li Yi did not spend it immediately. He kept some money for emergencies. When it was time to eat breakfast, Rui had not returned yet. When Li Yi asked Xiao Huan about it, the reply he received was that the young miss was often like this and the servant girl was already used to it. As for Lu Rui, Li Yi did not have much to worry about. To be able to shatter a solid wooden table with one palm, she was indeed a hero among heroes. Under normal circumstances, she would not encounter any danger. It was just that disappearing without a sound was not a good habit. Li Yi shook his head and no longer thought about this matter. He took out the hawthorns he bought yesterday and walked into the kitchen. Xiao Huan was washing the dishes in the kitchen. When she saw Li Yi walk in, she poured the leftover frosting from the Qiao Qiao festival into the pot. After adding a little water, she used a small fire to slowly boil it. After instructing the servant girl to watch the fire and not burn the syrup, Li Yi cleaned the hawthorns and used a knife to carefully cut them in half. He took out the seeds and polished the bamboo skewers that he had prepared beforehand and placed them to one side. The servant girl sat in front of the stove, her large eyes occasionally glancing in his direction. Son-in-law looks like he is going to make something delicious again, the servant girl thought, and began to look forward to the delicious food she was about to eat. What Li Yi planned to make today was candied hawthorns. There were no candied hawthorns in this world, but in his original world, it was one of the most popular snacks for thousands of years. Although there were great changes in the types of candied hawthorns in modern times, whether it was the careful selection of the raw materials, the exquisite packaging, or the substitution of other fruits, the taste of candied hawthorns was constantly changing. However, there was a kind of sourness with a hint of sweetness and a lingering fragrance in the mouth that could never be replaced. When Li Yi was young in his hometown in the countryside, what he most looked forward to seeing was the peddler who carried a swollen wooden stick filled with candied hawthorns. He would spend a few cents to buy a stick of candied hawthorns and would lick it for half a day. Later, when he grew up, he did not eat it again. Now that he came to this world, he missed that familiar taste. When these memories that belonged to him appeared in this world, his heart would also receive some comfort. Not long after, when the sugar in the pot was almost cooked, Li Yi skewered the hawthorns on the bamboo skewers and rolled them in the pot. The surface of the fruit was covered with a layer of crystal-clear sugar coating. After taking it out of the pot, the sugar quickly condensed and the world's first stick of candied hawthorns was out of the pot. In less than a quarter of an hour, Li Yi and Xiao Huan were squatting at the door, each holding 2 skewers of candied haws in their hands. They took a bite, and after a crisp sound, there was a sweet and sour taste in their mouths. This was the first time the servant girl ate candied hawthorns. She did not eat them in one bite like Li Yi, but first stuck out her little tongue to lick the sugar coating. Even her heart was filled with sweetness and her eyes curved into beautiful crescent moons. This scene was obviously very tempting. After a glance, Li Yi did not dare to look anymore. A young girl's unintentional action could almost make people lose control. What would happen when she grew up? Facing the 3 beauties at home all day, she could still maintain her chastity. Li Yi felt that even if Lu Xiaohui was reborn, he would not be able to do this. What is this? After finishing the 2 sticks of candied hawthorns in a few bites, a voice suddenly came from behind. Turning his head, he saw Lu Rui walking over with a stick of candied hawthorns in her hand. There was only half of the hawthorns left on the top. It was obvious that she had taken a bite. Oh, that is used to poison rats. There is arsenic in the icing, you must not eat it. Flicking away the remaining sugar residue at the corner of Lu Rui's mouth, Li Yi said with a straight face. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Rui's expression changed and her pretty face immediately turned pale. Young master, one of the candied hawthorns is missing. At this moment, the young servant girl walked over with 2 sticks of candied hawthorns in her hand and said with some confusion. Lu Rui turned her head and saw the thing in Xiao Huan's hand. There was still a bit of sugar coating at the corner of her mouth. When she turned back to look at Li Yi, her pretty face turned cold and her hand was already on the hilt of the sword at her waist. Li Yi raised his eyebrows. He was so used to teasing Xiao Huan that he did not realize that it was the witch Lu Rui just now. He stood up abruptly and strode out of the door. I remember now, we still have to go to school today. The young servant girl was stunned when she heard that. She said, Young master, have you forgotten? The school is closed today, you don't have to go, ahem, ahem. Chapter 39. At this moment, the most important thing was not how Lu Rui got injured, but how to treat the wound. In ancient times, there were no antibiotics. If the wound got infected and the condition worsened, there was no way to treat it. One could only lie down and wait for death. Without any awareness of disinfection, the number of people who died from infected wounds every year was uncountable. She did not know where this cloth was found. Although it looked clean, it was definitely full of bacteria. The wound had never been disinfected. This was a matter of life and death. Was there a need to be so careless? "Son-in-law, the water is ready." Not long after, a maidservant ran in with a clean copper basin. The conditions were too harsh and there was no condition to use alcohol or iodophor to disinfect. He mixed some salt water according to the ratio and asked the maid to throw a clean towel into the pot to boil. After dipping it in the salt water, he carefully cleaned Lu Rui's wound. The effect of salt water was not as good as alcohol, but it was better than nothing. Fortunately, the wound was not deep. Otherwise, the wound would have to be sutured before the medicine could be applied. There was no medical bandage, so he could only use gauze that had been boiled in boiling water as a substitute. The last time when Xiaohuan cut her hand, Li Yi prepared some and it came in handy this time. From the beginning to the end, Lu Rui just watched quietly and did not say a word. As a martial artist, there were countless bumps and bruises in daily life. However, their physique was far better than ordinary people. Even if it was a knife wound, it could heal quickly. She did not take such a small injury to heart. But at this moment, Li Yi's serious look made her not say the words of rejection that she wanted to say. This was the first time in her life that she had seen such a method of treating wounds. Although she didn't know why he had to use salt water to clean the wound, and the gauze used to bandage the wound seemed to be particular, Lu Rui was very convinced of Li Yi's abilities. Moreover, this feeling of being taken care of was something that she had not experienced for a long time. Of course, if he did not tie a butterfly knot with the gauze at the end, everything would be even more perfect. As for Lu Rui taking apart the butterfly knot that she tied with great difficulty and making an ugly knot, Li Yi had some complaints in his heart. What a beautiful bow! It was pleasing to the eye and looked a little cute. Xiaohuan was still the most obedient. After treating Lu Rui's wound, she went out to teach the little maid how to tie a butterfly knot. "Sis, in the future, don't help the government catch those fugitives." After Li Yi and Xiaohuan left, Rui sat in front of the bed, holding Lu Rui's hand and said after a long silence. Lu Rui smiled and said, "I was careless this time and underestimated his strength." Even the naughtiest naughty child in the stockade village would behave in front of Li Yi. This was something that all the naughty children's parents were envious of. Moreover, in the recent days, the image of Li Yi in the hearts of the direct descendants of the Lu clan had undergone an earth-shattering change. They could look down on the scholar who didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken, but if this scholar could casually draw a painting in exchange for 10 stone meters of rice, then everything would be different. Looking at the fact that someone who used to live at the same standard of living as them, or even worse than them, could eat rice for every meal, this kind of psychological gap was not something that could be erased in a short period of time. Moreover, it could be foreseen that this was only the beginning. It wouldn't be long before there would be an even greater gap in the stockade village. Those who wanted to seize the land and other resources that belonged to Lu Rui and her sister did so to improve their own lives. However, who would have thought that because of this reason, they would become enemies with the direct descendants of the Lu clan, which would instead cause them a greater loss. In a short period of time, more and more people began to weigh the gains and losses in their hearts, and a certain scholar who caused this change was currently waving a palm leaf fan, leisurely sitting under a tree in front of the door to enjoy the cool air. Although the weather at the beginning of August had already entered autumn, the weather at night was still hot and stuffy. Staying inside the house was even more irritating, so it was better to enjoy the wind under the tree outside. The only bad thing was that there were a lot of mosquitoes here. In just a short while, Li Yi's body had already been bitten several times. Just as he was wondering if there was any way to repel the mosquitoes, a sturdy figure walked over from the front. Chapter 40. It had been a long time since Li Yi came to Willow Leaf Village. At first, there was a little unpleasantness between him and the man surnamed Fang. Li Yi suffered a lot when he was caught and thrown on the back of a horse. However, as the two gradually became familiar with each other, the little unpleasantness also disappeared. Old Fang's temperament was very simple and honest. Although he was a little stupid, he was loyal to Lu Rui and her sister. Li Yi liked such a simple and honest person. There were a dozen simple people like the man surnamed Fong in the village. If it were not for these people who had been helping them all these years, Lu Rui and her sister would have been eaten up by those covetous uncles. Whoever was good to his wife and sister-in-law, he would be good to them. This had always been Li Yi's way of doing things. That was why he could distribute the food to them without so much as a frown. During this period of time, he had truly treated them as his own people. The man surnamed Fong came over and sat on the stone next to Li Yi. He seemed to be in a bad mood. "Fong, what's wrong? You look sad. Did Dahe steal Zhu Zi's steamed buns again?" After getting familiar with him, Li Yi also called the man surnamed Fong casually. Zhu Zi was the son of the man surnamed Fong, and Dahe was their yellow native dog, a dog that always liked to steal the children's steamed buns. Li Yi had seen countless times that Dahe had a steamed bun in its mouth, and the man surnamed Fong chased it all over the village with a broom in his hand. He swore that he would kill it and eat it with wine when he got back. As a result, the chase between a man and a dog would happen again every few days. It was reasonable to say that the man surnamed Fong should not be worried recently. Because of the food distributed last time, Fong's family temporarily moved from the bottom of the village to a well-off level and walked ahead of most people. At least for a short time, they did not have to worry about food and clothing. This was also what Li Yi found strange. At this time, the burly man surnamed Fong obviously shouldn't be worrying. Could it be that he also encountered those special days of the month? Of course, it could not be ruled out that the couple's life was not harmonious last night, and he was despised by his mother-in-law in the morning. However, looking at Fong's energetic appearance, this possibility should not be high. Sigh. The man with the surname Fong sighed and turned to look at Li Yi. He asked, "Young master, do you think I can only stay with my mother-in-law for the rest of my life?" When he said this, a strong unwillingness appeared on the face of the simple and honest man. At this moment, Li Yi actually saw in his eyes an unyielding resistance to fate. He looked at Fong with some surprise. If he didn't misunderstand, was Fong talking about his life ideals with him? This was his current attitude towards life. Of course, before that, he had to accumulate enough wealth. Otherwise, he could only pursue a peaceful life while eating scraps and vegetables. It was a good thing that Fong had ideas and ideals. Recently, Li Yi also had an idea in his mind. After being here for so long, it was time to do something for this world. High-density alcohol and soap could not be made in a hurry. Just buying the raw materials would cost a lot. Without dozens or hundreds of taels of silver, he could only think about it. The cost was small, and the returns were quick. Li Yi thought about it for a while and finally came up with a good idea. The candied haws that only appeared in the Willow Leaf village should go out of the mountain and bring benefits to the naughty children in this world. The hawthorn fruit needed to make candied haws was called red fruit in this world. For people living in the mountain, it was a material with zero cost. There was a large hawthorn forest behind the mountain, and there were as many fresh hawthorn fruits as one wanted. The icing used to make the candied haws needed to be bought in the marketplace at the foot of the mountain, but the price was not too high. 2 taels of silver were enough to start the candied haws plan. For the time being, it would be the first step of his plan to make money in this world. Li Yi had absolute confidence in this kind of treasure, which had been passed down for thousands of years in the original world and was still very attractive to naughty children. The reason why he hadn't brought it up was that he didn't want to work himself to death all day carrying a stick through the streets. When he turned around and saw old Fong's depressed face, Li Yi's face lit up like a spring breeze. Speaking of this idea, I do have one. Old Wu came to find me this morning and said that he wants to try too. Why don't you rest and let him do it? Looking at the expression on Li Yi's face, Fong felt at ease. The next moment, Fong's face immediately changed into his signature honest smile. He put his arm around Li Yi's shoulder and said, "There's no need, there's no need. Old Wu has a one-track mind. He's not the type to do this. Besides, what kind of relationship do I have with the son-in-law? Don't forget that I was the one who captured the son-in-law." Seeing the burly man with the surname Fong walk out with a smile, several black lines appeared on Li Yi's face. It was very easy to make candied hawthorns and didn't require much preparation time. Fong had already bought the icing from the foot of the mountain. The August hawthorns were not fully ripe yet, but it didn't affect the taste much. Under Li Yi's guidance, Fong cut all the bamboo from the mountain into bamboo sticks of similar size. The edges were polished smooth and the bottom of the bamboo stick was slightly wider, making it more suitable to hold. After the hawthorns were seeded and coated in the syrup, he dipped a little sesame seed on the top. There was a little white in the middle, making it look even more attractive. He stuck all of the candied hawthorns on wooden sticks and brooms. Seeing the naughty child beside him gulping down his saliva, Fong felt a little more confident. He took down a candied hawthorn and handed it to him. He conveniently kicked the naughty child's butt and said, "Listen to your mother at home. Wait for me to come back tonight." 2 hours later, on the crowded main street of Qingham Prefecture, the simple and honest man carried a strange object and stood by the side of the road. He hesitated for a long time before a resolute expression appeared on his face. A moment later, a voice full of energy traveled over. "Ice candied gourd." For a moment, several gazes were cast over from the crowd on the street. Chapter 42. Candied haws. What is that? I don't know, I've never heard of it before. Let's go and take a look. The term candied haws was undoubtedly a new term to the people of this world. With a curious mentality, the pedestrians on the street all looked in the direction of the voice. They saw a burly man standing in a corner of the street, holding a long object in his hand. The top of the object was densely packed with something. Looking closely, those things that were the size of abacus beads were strung together. Weren't they just ordinary red fruits? Even if the red fruit was covered with a layer of crystal-clear stuff and sprinkled with sesame seeds, it couldn't change the fact that it was a red fruit. "Hey, man, how much are you selling this ice something gourd?" A young man in a long robe came forward and asked. 5 copper coins for a skewer." The simple and honest man immediately replied. 5 copper coins. The young man was stunned at first, then he shook his head and left. Red fruits were not rare. One could buy a few caddies of them on the street for 1 copper coin. Only a fool would spend 5 copper coins for just a few of them. I thought it was some rare item, but it's just a few red fruits. 5 copper coins for a skewer. This man really dares to ask for a price. TSK, there's nothing to see, let's go. When he saw the crowd that had been attracted by his first call quickly disappear, the heart of the man surnamed Fong could not help but sink. The thing that he was most worried about had happened. "Here's 5 copper coins, give me a skewer." A voice came from the side. The man surnamed Fong turned his head and saw a middle-aged scholar in navy blue robes. He took out 5 copper coins from his chest pocket and placed them in his hand. This was his first customer. The burly man was overjoyed and hurriedly put the money away. He took a skewer of candied haws and handed it over. "Your candied haws." The scholar reached out and took it, then left. The burly man, who wanted to get his evaluation, felt a little disappointed. After all, he didn't want everything he had done for the past few days to be in vain. In a place where the burly man surnamed Fong couldn't see, the middle-aged scholar took a bite of the sugar-coated haws, and a trace of surprise flashed across his face. He lowered his head to look at the sugar-coated haws in his hand and murmured, "There's sweetness in the sour, crispy and delicious. I really didn't expect that red fruits could be made in such a novel way." Because he was a little hungry, he bought a snack that he had never seen before on a whim, but it gave him a different kind of surprise. A smile appeared on the middle-aged scholar's face, and his mood seemed to improve a little. He continued to walk forward. At this moment, the burly man surnamed Fong, who had just completed his first transaction, had a glimmer of hope in his heart. He raised his head and shouted at the top of his lungs. "Candied haws, delicious candied haws, candied haws, it's free if it's not sweet." After an hour, the man with the surname Fong, whose voice had become somewhat hoarse from all the shouting, leaned against the wall in an extremely discouraged manner. The trace of hope in his heart had also been mercilessly destroyed. Up until now, his second skewer of candied haws had not been sold. It had to be said that the shape of the candied haws was very peculiar, and it attracted many people to inquire about it. However, when they saw that the so-called candied haws were just a few red fruits strung together, and the price was actually 5 copper coins, they all lost interest. "Should I try selling it for 1 copper coin a skewer first?" Fong muttered to himself somewhat helplessly. However, when he remembered that the son-in-law had warned him before he left that a skewer of candied haws could not be less than 5 copper coins, he could only give up on this idea. On the street, a little further away from the burly man surnamed Fong, a mischievous child of about 5 or 6 years old was hugging a woman's thigh and wailing incessantly. "Be good, mother will make delicious food for you when we get back," the woman helplessly said as she looked at her child who was suddenly making a scene. No matter how hard she tried to coax him, she could not calm him down. "No, I want to eat it now." The mischievous child was obviously not that easy to fool. He hugged her thigh and shook his head vigorously. The mischievous child, who had long since figured out his mother's routine, knew that what awaited him when he returned home was definitely not delicious food, but a vicious beating as punishment for his disobedience. Rather than foolishly waiting to be beaten when he returned home, he might as well pester his mother for some benefits. This way, it would be worth it even if he was beaten when he returned home. The mischievous child who was making a scene on the street quickly attracted the attention of passers-by. The woman also felt a little embarrassed when she was stared at by so many people. She wanted to calm the child down first, and then slowly educate him when they returned home. However, she suddenly realized that the crying beside her had stopped. She looked down and discovered that the mischievous child was staring straight ahead. He swallowed his saliva, pointed in the direction of the corner of the street, and said, "Mother, I want that." After a moment, the mischievous child, who had tasted his desire, left while licking the candied haws in satisfaction. He was extremely fond of this delicacy that he had never tasted before. After finishing all of the hawthorns, he licked the sugar off the bamboo stick, but he was reluctant to throw it away. He carefully put it away, and even licked the residue from the corner of his mouth. He was filled with joy, thinking that he would definitely tell a few of his close friends when he returned home. He did not notice that the woman beside him had a rather unpleasant expression on her face. The first thing he would be greeted with when he returned home was a vicious beating. After 2 whole hours, he had only sold 2 candied haws. Fong's heart was already in complete despair. "This time, I'm afraid the young master is going to be disappointed." After letting out a long sigh, the man with the surname Fong picked up the stick with the candied haws and prepared to return home. He had only taken a few steps when he suddenly heard a flurry of footsteps behind him. In the next moment, he discovered that he had been surrounded. The people surrounding Fong were a group of mischievous children. The oldest among them was only 10 years old, and they all looked at Fong with excited gazes, the candied haws in his hands. The mischievous child standing at the very front was about 5 or 6 years old. Fong had just met him. He was the one who had taken care of his second business. The mischievous child covered his butt with one hand, and the tears on his face had yet to dry. He pointed at the skewers of candied haws and said, "This is the one. Whether I lied to you or not, you'll know soon enough." After saying that, the mischievous child stretched out his small hand and revealed the 5 copper coins in his palm. He said loudly, "Uncle, I want a skewer of candied haws." "Me too. Me too." I want 2 skewers. The mischievous children chattered one after another. Fong looked at the fair and clean little hands that were stretched out, and his expression was a little dazed. On the street, a girl passing by was puzzled as she watched a group of excited naughty kids rushing past her. Each of them was holding a skewer of food and eating deliciously. When she looked ahead, she saw a burly man carrying a strange stick. The strength of the mischievous children could not be underestimated. A small portion of the candied haws disappeared in an instant, and was replaced by a large pile of copper coins in his pocket. "Excuse me, how much is this?" Just as Fong was standing there in a daze, a pleasant voice came from the side. Seeing the incomparably delicate young girl standing next to him, the man with the surname Fong couldn't help but blush. He said, Five copper coins. All right, give me one." The young girl nodded and said with a smile. She took a small bite, and her mouth was instantly filled with a sweet and sour taste. The young girl's beautiful eyes slightly brightened. She took out a small piece of silver from her beautiful pouch and pointed at the remaining candied haws. "I want all of these." Chapter 43. Fong had brought around 30 skewers of candied haws with him today. Half of them had been bought by the naughty children, and there were still around a dozen left. It was obvious that the young girl couldn't carry them all by herself. After the young girl paid, Fong took the initiative to help her deliver them to the place. With so many copper coins in his pocket, it felt heavy and made him feel very at ease. At this moment, Fong couldn't help but feel ashamed for doubting his son-in-law's thoughts. "Uncle, how are these candied haws made?" The young girl walked in front with a skewer of candied haws in her hand. She gently licked the sugar coating and guessed that it was frosting, but she wasn't sure. She turned her head and asked in confusion. "Miss, I can't tell you that." Fong laughed foolishly. He didn't reveal the method of making the candied haws just because the young girl was beautiful. Fong wasn't that stupid. This was something he would use to make his family rich in the future. How could he just casually tell others? Hearing Fong's answer, the young girl was stunned for a moment. After a while, she also realized that her question was a bit inappropriate. She smiled apologetically and said, "Sorry, I forgot that this is Uncle's secret recipe. I shouldn't have asked." Fong laughed foolishly and didn't reply. He followed behind the young girl and walked through the noisy street. He didn't know when it started, but the crowd started to thin out. The buildings on both sides also gradually became more luxurious. There was a row of red doors with mighty stone lions in front of them. It was extremely extravagant. To buy a stronghold here, it would probably cost a lot of money. Fong muttered to himself. He also began to wonder about the identity of the young girl. After all, the people who could live here were either rich or noble. They weren't people ordinary people like them could come into contact with. "It's here." Not long after, the young girl stopped walking. She turned around and smiled at the man surnamed Fong. "Wait here for a moment. I'll go in and come out immediately." Fong nodded and watched the young girl walk through the 10-feet-tall door. The 2 servants at the door bent over and said something. Because he was too far away, he couldn't hear clearly. Not long after, the young girl's figure appeared again. 4 young girls followed behind her, each holding a tray in their hands. They walked to the front of the burly man surnamed Fong and looked at the strings of crystal-clear candied haws. The young girl on the left asked curiously, "Sister Yenji, what is this?" "Don't ask too much. I'll tell you later. First, pluck these candied haws." The girls looked at Fong with puzzled eyes, then looked at the candied haws one by one. He couldn't throw away the stick he was carrying on his shoulder. By the time these girls took all the candied haws off the tree, Fong's mission had been completed. The sweet and sour taste made her mouth water. She then said, "It's delicious." Seeing the woman finish the stick of candied haws, all the young girls couldn't help but widen their eyes. Especially the young girl named Yenji, a look of surprise appeared on her pretty face. As the personal maid of the princess, she certainly knew that the princess had been feeling unwell these days. She could hardly eat anything. Occasionally, she would eat something, but she would quickly spit it out. As a result, she had lost a lot of weight. Many doctors had been invited, but they were all useless. Even the specially invited imperial doctors were helpless. After so many days, this was the first time she had seen the princess eat so happily. Why do I feel even hungrier after eating all this? After eating the candied haws in her hand, the woman had a look of confusion on her face. She said, "Yenji, tell the kitchen to make some food and send it to the room later." "Yes, princess, I'll go right away." The young girl's face was even more surprised. After responding, she immediately trotted away. A moment later, in the study of the manor, the middle-aged man who was reading in the room suddenly stood up when he heard the servant's report. With a face full of joy, he said, "What did you say? Princess can eat now?" The young girl nodded and said, "Yes." The princess took the initiative to ask the kitchen to make food. Sister Yenji said that the princess ate a lot tonight. "Quick, take me to see the princess." The middle-aged man laughed and strode out of the room after his beloved wife's stubborn illness was cured. At the same time, Fong also strode into Li Yi's house. Clatter. Piling up a large pile of copper coins on the table in front of him, Fong laughed and said, "Young master, all the candied haws have been sold." Previously, he only earned 100 copper coins a month. Today, in just a short time, it was equivalent to his monthly income. Fong was extremely happy. Now we don't have to worry about whether Zhuzi can get a wife or not, do we? This result was within Li Yi's expectation, so he said with a smile. Lao Fong laughed heartily and said with lofty sentiments, "Don't worry. If we make money in the future, we can also learn from those rich people and live in big houses, marry a few concubines, and live a comfortable life." The big houses that he saw today had obviously completely stimulated Fong, and even his life goals had been raised a lot. It seemed that he was shocked by Fong's lofty ideals. Li Yi's smile froze on his face. After a while, he sighed, stood up, patted Fong on the shoulder, and turned away without saying a word. "Young master, what's wrong?" Li Yi's actions puzzled the man with the surname Fong. Just as he was about to ask, he seemed to have sensed something. He turned his head abruptly and saw a familiar face appear behind him. However, at this time, this familiar face was extremely gloomy. Who else could it be but his wife? "Fool, what did you just say?" In just a moment, the broom in Li Yi's house was in Madame Fong's hand. What a sin! Li Yi stood in the courtyard and heard the screams coming from the room. He sighed deeply. Chapter 44. Li Yi really couldn't see it. Fong, who usually looked very gentle, could turn into a tough woman in a second. She waved the broom vigorously in her hand. Fong had a body full of skills, but at this moment, he couldn't use any of them. He could only cover his head and flee like a rat. Li Yi, who was standing in the courtyard, happened to catch a glimpse of Madame Fong's ferocious scene inside the house, and he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. If you're not from the same family, you're from the same family. Old Fong's family probably all have Super Saiyan genes and can complete a gorgeous transformation in an instant. Half an hour later, Li Yi waved a palm leaf fan in his hand and leisurely sat under a tree at the entrance to enjoy the cool breeze. Opposite him, the bruised and swollen face of the burly man surnamed Fong looked at him with a bitter expression. "Son-in-law, you are not kind." Fong held back for a long time before saying this. Obviously, he was still brooding over the fact that Li Yi didn't remind him just now. "Don't look at me like that. I didn't say anything. You asked for it." Being stared at by this guy with big eyes, Li Yi always felt like he was being stared at by a dog. He hurriedly waved his hand and said. It was obviously Fong who had a cheap mouth. This kind of thing couldn't be blamed on him. Fong opened his mouth and found that he was speechless. He carefully thought about what Li Yi said and suddenly felt that what he said was very reasonable. It was him who said to live in a big house, and it was him who said to marry a concubine. Fortunately, he didn't say that he would divorce his mother-in-law at that time. Otherwise, how could he still stand here and talk to the son-in-law now? He could probably only nag a few words when he offered incense every year. Fong didn't want to talk about the sad past. Thinking about how popular the candied halls was, he was ecstatic and said, "You're right. This candied halls is really a good way to make money. It's much better than herding horses in the stockade." Li Yi looked at Fong with disdain. Up until now, Fong was still thinking about buying a big house and marrying a concubine. Perhaps even in his next life, he would not be able to realize this dream. "Son-in-law, what should we do next?" Previously, Li Yi had said that today was just a small experiment. Fong couldn't wait to ask. Even good wine was afraid of a deep alley. If he wanted to sell candied haws in this world, it was obviously not enough for Fong to carry a stick and sell them on the street alone. Li Yi needed more manpower. Go and ask everyone who else is willing to participate in this matter. We need more people. Li Yi thought about it and said. Li Yi originally wanted to let people who were close to Lu's sister Rui participate. For them, this was definitely beneficial and not harmful. It was enough to change their lives. Ro has lost a lot of weight these days. I will send someone to deliver some tonics. The middle-aged man stroked the beautiful woman's pretty face and said with some heartache. The beautiful woman's face couldn't help but blush. She looked up at the young man opposite her and said in a small voice, "Xian, is still here." The young man opposite them coughed dryly and said, "Father, mother, I didn't see anything." Hearing his words, the beautiful woman snorted and laughed. Then, as if remembering something, she said, "I don't really want to eat the other dishes, but I do miss the taste of the candied hawthorns from yesterday." The middle-aged man glared at the young man who was engrossed in eating. "What are you spacing out for? Didn't you hear what your mother said? Hurry up and buy the candied hawthorns." "Yes, father." It was quite awkward to sit here and watch his father and mother show off their affection. Hearing this, the young man immediately stood up and said, "I will go ask Yenji where she bought the candied hawthorns." "Wait." The middle-aged man thought for a moment and said, "Since your mother likes to eat it, why don't we directly invite that person to the mansion and arrange for him to be in the kitchen? That way, she can eat it at any time." "I understand." The young man responded and then walked out of the hall. His mother's depression had improved and he was also very happy. From afar, he saw the girl called Yenji walking over and immediately waved at her. Chapter 45. Qing and Prefecture was huge. If they wanted to spread the candied haws as quickly as possible, they would need a lot of manpower. Fong alone was far from enough. They parted ways at the city gate. Li Yi followed Fong and listened to him boast about how popular he was with the naughty kids yesterday. When they reached a certain street, Fong's body shook and he looked at the familiar corner of the street. A dozen naughty kids were gathered there, their faces full of anxiety. "What candied haws? Are you guys lying to us? Liars are puppies. There really were candied haws yesterday. Why didn't that uncle come today? Are there no candied haws today?" The naughty kids paced around anxiously. For the first time in their lives, they didn't sleep in this morning. They woke up all their friends early in the morning and asked their parents for a few copper coins before rushing here. However, they were disappointed to find that the uncle who sold candied haws yesterday was not here. The naughty kids even searched the surrounding area but couldn't find a single candied haw vendor. When they thought about how they would never be able to eat the sweet and sour candied haws again, the naughty kids became even more anxious. "Look, that uncle is here!" someone shouted first. The naughty kids turned their heads and saw a familiar figure standing on the street. The next moment, they saw the candied haws that they had been yearning for day and night. Whoosh! The scene from the day before replayed itself. "Uncle, I want 2 skewers. I want 3 skewers. Here are 20 copper coins. Give me 4 skewers." The naughty kids fought to be the first. One by one, they stretched out their little hands and stuffed the copper coins into Fong's arms. They were afraid that all the candied haws would be bought by someone else if they were too late. Seeing the naughty kids leave one by one in satisfaction, and the candied haws were half gone, Fong's face was full of smiles. This made him feel like he was one step closer to his dream. However, compared to the feeling of realizing his dream, another feeling came faster and more urgent. Not long after, Fong held his stomach, bent over, and said to Li Yi, "Son-in-law, please look after him for a while. I'm going to relieve myself." Without waiting for Li Yi to nod, Fong had already disappeared. Li Yi originally wanted to wander around the city, but now he could only wait for Fong to return. After a while, a few sticks of tanghulu were sold. Almost all of the buyers were naughty children, or some adults who were pestered by naughty children. Occasionally, a well-dressed young lady would buy a bunch or two, but when normal adults saw that these were just ordinary red fruits, they didn't have the heart to buy them. This was within Li Yi's expectations. The biggest consumer group of tanghulu were naughty children. Whether it was in ancient times or modern times, women and children were the absolute main consumers, which was in line with his initial positioning of tanghulu. The remaining dozen or so skewers of candied haws were sold out in a short while, leaving only 1 skewer stuck on top. It was an eyesore and uncomfortable no matter how he looked at it. Li Yi frowned and plucked the last skewer of candied haws. Just as he brought it to his mouth, a voice suddenly came from afar. "Shut up!" Crunch! A crisp sound came. He had already bitten off the first stick of hawthorn fruit. In order to make delicious tanghulu, it was very important to control the heat when boiling the sugar paste. This time, the sugar paste had been boiled for a long time, and it was a little burnt. He remembered to remind them to be careful next time. Then, Li Yi raised his head and looked at the young man who was trotting over. After a moment of surprise, 2 voices came almost at the same time. "It's you! It's you!" The young man was also a little surprised. He didn't expect that the person selling the tanghulu was actually the scholar who painted the last time. Of course, Li Yi also recognized this friend at once. After all, he had only met one rich man in this world who was willing to spend 10 taels of silver to buy a painting. After a short moment of surprise, the young man moved his eyes away from Li Yi's face and looked at the last stick of tanghulu in his hand, which he had already bitten off. "You," he stretched out a finger and pointed at Li Yi. Just as he said one word, he suddenly waved his hand dispiritedly, grabbed Li Yi's arm, and said, "Follow me." "What are you doing?" The young man was thin and weak, but he was quite strong. Li Yi staggered and was forcibly pulled forward by him. "Did you make this tanghulu? Let go of me first. Is it you or not? So what if it is?" That's right. Life was like being F***ked. Since he couldn't resist, he would enjoy it. After a while, Li Yi understood that his strength was far less than the young man's. If he continued to struggle like this, he would be the one suffering. So, he simply gave up resisting and followed the young man forward. It didn't look like this guy wanted to drag him to see the officials because someone died from eating tanghulu, as long as it wasn't about that. At this time, on the street not far in front of the 2 of them, several strong men swaggered. The leader was a man with a scar on his face. He took 2 steamed buns from a stall on the street. The stall owner saw that the man swaggered away without paying, and a trace of anger flashed in his eyes. Finally, he sighed and could only accept his bad luck. He dared to be angry but didn't dare to say anything. "Big brother, look who that is." Suddenly, one of the men beside the scarred man trembled and suddenly pointed to the front as if he had seen something. When the scarred man heard this, he looked up and saw a familiar figure. He was slightly startled, and his face immediately became gloomy. How could he forget that he was beaten up by a few hateful guys in the alley that day? He was beaten miserably. The saddest thing was that he was arrested and sent to jail for several days. Not only did he eat moldy food, he didn't even have a comfortable place to sleep. Every time he dreamed of those days, he would wake up in a cold sweat. The source of all this was because of the guy who made him gnash his teeth in hatred when he thought about it. And the scholar who he would only be satisfied with if he could destroy the people had now appeared in front of him again. Follow them. Even if these ruffians were bold, they still didn't dare to do anything too presumptuous on the street. With a gloomy face, they ordered and followed far behind the two people. Until now, Li Yi still didn't know where the young man was hurriedly dragging him and what they were going to do. Just as he was about to ask again, there was suddenly a burst of chaotic footsteps behind them. In an instant, the two of them were surrounded. "Who are you people? What do you want?" the young man asked with a frown when his path was blocked. "Brat, if you know what's good for you, hurry up and scram. This has nothing to do with you." The scarred man glared at the young man, and then looked at Li Yi with extreme hatred in his eyes. Chapter 46. When he saw the scar-faced man again, Li Yi knew that things were going to be bad. Just by looking at the hateful expression on his face and his fiery eyes, it was obvious that this guy was a very vengeful person. Last time, he had Fong and the others by his side to protect him. This time, it was just the two of them. Moreover, the young man beside him did not seem to have much combat power. It was likely that he would be defeated this time. The two of them had already passed through the most bustling street. At this time, there were only a few passers-by on both sides of the road. These people had clearly planned to surround them here. Scram! Although the young man did not recognize the scar-faced man in front of him, it was obvious that the other party was up to no good. His face darkened as he spoke coldly. It was obvious that the enemy was strong while he was weak, but this young man was still so unyielding. This caused Li Yi to involuntarily look at him a few more times. He was not afraid in the face of danger and did not bow down to evil forces. He had some of the demeanor that Li Yi had in the past. "What did you say?" The scar-faced man's expression froze. He looked at Li Yi and the young man in front of him with a gloomy expression. "Can't you see that I have so many people on my side? You actually dare to speak to me like this?" Thinking of the scholar's reaction last time, the scar-faced man looked at the two of them again. Could they be blood brothers? "Brat, I originally wanted to let you go today. Now, don't even think about leaving." The scar-faced man stared at the young man with an unfriendly gaze and said fiercely. Without those abnormal fellows from last time, the scar-faced man did not feel any pressure in his heart. "I'll give you 3 breaths of time to finish them off." At this time, the young man opened his mouth with a gloomy expression. It was as if he was speaking to the surrounding air. The scar-faced man and the other men were stunned when they heard this. It was obvious that they were surprised by the young man's actions. However, in the next moment, they could not help but burst into laughter. "Brat, could it be that you've lost your mind?" One of the men had just spoken halfway when a passerby who walked past him suddenly exploded and punched out. The man's body was immediately sent flying. There was no time for the scar-faced man and the others to react. A man who was squatting down at a roadside stall and picking up goods used one hand to support himself. With a sweep of his leg, another few men fell. Clang! It was the sound of a long sword being unsheathed. Suddenly, a flash of saber light flashed in front of the scar-faced man's eyes. A peddler who was carrying a load and walking by suddenly turned around, pulled out a long saber from his waist, and put it on the scar-faced man's neck. Everything happened so suddenly. At this moment, he deeply realized that this nouveau riche's background was not ordinary. Ning Wang Mansion. Above the gate, there was a large plaque with these words written squarely on it. Of course, such a plaque could not be hung on the door of one's own house. Could it be that this young man in front of him was actually a member of the royal family of the Jing Kingdom? Before Li Yi could figure out this question, he was pulled into the gate by the young man. Young prince. The two servants standing at the door hurriedly bowed to greet him. This prince's mansion was very big. Being pulled by the young man, Li Yi didn't know how many twists and turns they had gone through, and finally stopped in front of a gatehouse. The young man pushed the door open, and when the few people in the room looked up, they immediately stopped what they were doing, and bowed together, saying, "Young prince. Quick, make some candied fruits immediately." The young man waved his hand at them and said in a hurried tone. Hearing this, Li Yi was stunned for a moment. After all this time, this guy had hurriedly brought him here just to make candied fruits for him. This was the first time that Li Yi had seen such a willful nouveau riche. Looking around, looking at the furnishings here, it should be a kitchen or something like that. On the table beside him, there were some hawthorns and white sugar. It seemed that they had tried making candied fruits by themselves. However, although the method of making candied fruits was simple, the ratio of sugar to water, the temperature, and the time of boiling would affect the taste of the candied fruits. Without countless predecessors' hundreds and thousands of years of exploration and experimentation, it was really not an easy thing to make delicious candied fruits. Chapter 47. While Li Yi was looking around, the people around him were also looking at him. The person who made candied haws and improved the princess's depression was the scholar in front of them. It had to be said that this was quite different from the image they had imagined. It's not difficult to make candied haws. You just need to add water to the icing and boil it into a sugar paste, and then wrap it on the red fruits without seeds. Li Yi looked at the young man and said, "I've told you the method of making candied haws. I'm sorry, I still have something urgent to deal with. Goodbye." Li Yi didn't want to tell anyone about the core technique of candied haws. He was not familiar with this guy, and he just wanted to keep his own territory. He didn't want to have anything to do with the prince's mansion. If he didn't go back, Fong would be worried if he couldn't find him. After that, Li Yi strode outside. "Child, please wait." At this moment, a sweet voice came from behind. The girl named Yanji quickly walked up and said, "Child, you don't know. Although there are only two materials, red fruits and icing, we have tried many times, but the taste of the candied haws is still not satisfactory. Please tell me if there is any mystery in it." Li Yi paused and then said with a smile, "Miss, I'm afraid you think too much. I've told you everything I know. There is no mystery in it." Li Yi's face was full of sincerity. Although the girl still had doubts in her heart, she was already 70 to 80% convinced. She turned to the young man and said, "Young prince, the person who sold the candied haws yesterday was not this young master. I'm afraid we have the wrong person." "Yes, yes." Li Yi nodded and quickened his pace toward the door. 10 taels of silver. At this moment, the young man suddenly said. The girl was stunned when she heard this. She didn't know what the little prince meant. At the same time, Li Yi had just stepped out of the door when he suddenly stopped. "I was rude just now. If I offended you in any way, please don't blame me. Yanji, give this brother 10 taels of silver as an apology." Li Yi turned his head and found that the young man was looking at him with a faint smile. After looking at the young man for a few seconds, Li Yi also smiled. Only the two of them knew what this smile meant. This little prince was also a person who was particular. The smile on Li Yi's face became even brighter. He said with a smile, although there is nothing special about the cooking method of this dish, it is rare for the young prince to be so kind. What's the harm in trying it out? Although she didn't know why this child suddenly changed his mind, he had promised to help her. The girl was happy and said hurriedly, "Thank you very much." The strange expression on the young man's face became even more obvious. He stretched out his hand and made an inviting gesture. "Brother, please." After a while, everyone, including the young man, looked at Li Yi skillfully handling the hawthorn and boiling the sugar paste. His movements were smooth, and their faces revealed an astonished expression. For a gentle and refined scholar to do such things, it still gave them quite a shock. Because there were no bamboo sticks, Li Yi wrapped the candied hawthorn in the sugar paste and placed it on a plate. The girl used her chopsticks to pick one up. After taking a bite, her beautiful eyes couldn't help but light up. She turned to the young man and said, "Little prince, this is the taste from yesterday. I'll send it to mother right away." The young man was overjoyed. He took the plate from the girl's hands and strode out. Li Yi felt a little strange when he heard this. From the looks of it, the one who liked eating candied hawthorn seemed to be some princess. Could it be that eating candied hawthorn could make one addicted? After the young man left, the girl bowed to Li Yi and said, "Thank you, young master. Thanks to young master's candied hawthorn, the princess's illness has improved." The princess's illness. Li Yi was a little confused when he heard this. He really didn't know that candied hawthorn could actually have the effect of treating illnesses. "May I ask, what illness is the princess suffering from?" Li Yi was a little curious and couldn't help but ask. The girl's expression was a little hesitant, but then she thought about it. If it wasn't for the scholar in front of her, the princess's illness wouldn't have improved. After thinking for a while, she said, "The imperial physician said it's an illness of stagnation. However, after taking the medicine for half a month, the princess is still tired of eating every day and can't sleep at night. During this period of time, her body has become increasingly thin." Li Yi didn't know what an illness of stagnation was, but he understood from the girl's description. Can't eat, can't sleep, is prone to fever, and is getting more and more haggard. Isn't this indigestion? Needless to say, Li Yi also knew that in this prince's mansion, there must be a lot of fish and meat all day long. If one's stomach wasn't good, it would be strange if he didn't have indigestion. And candied hawthorn had the effect of clearing the lungs, digesting food, and stimulating the appetite. It was especially effective for indigestion caused by eating too much meat. In his previous life, Li Yi's stomach was very bad. Every time he came home, one of the dishes on the table was candied hawthorn. When he was studying abroad, his mother would often call to remind him to take care of his stomach, eat less greasy food, eat more coarse grains, pay attention to nourishing his stomach, and don't stay up late at night. And that person who loved him the most and treated him the best in the world, he would never see her again. Suddenly touching the deepest memories in his heart, Li Yi's eyes unconsciously became wet. The girl named Yanji looked at the scholar with tears in his eyes in surprise. She just talked about the princess's illness, and this child was moved to tears. At this moment, the door of the kitchen was suddenly pushed open, and the young prince walked in with an excited face. He ordered a few cooks, immediately make some of the princess's favorite dishes. "I didn't expect this candied hawthorn to have such a miraculous effect." The young man turned to look at Li Yi and said with a face full of surprise. The illness of stagnation that even the imperial physicians couldn't do anything about could actually improve because of this small thing. His mother, who was usually extremely anorexic, actually took the initiative to eat after eating those red fruits. It was really hard to imagine. At this moment, Li Yi's mood had already returned to normal. He smiled and said, "The red fruits are indeed effective in treating stagnation, but it isn't a cure for the root cause. Do you know how to treat stagnation?" The young man's body suddenly trembled when he heard this, and he grabbed Li Yi's arm and asked, "I know a thing or two," Li Yi said with a smile. Li Yi felt a little apologetic in his heart for charging him 10 taels of silver for a candied hawthorn dish. No matter what, they were old customers. Li Yi had to make them feel that these 10 taels of silver were well spent. If these words were said by someone else, the young man and the girl would definitely not believe them. But when Li Yi said it, they already believed most of it. After all, he had already created a miracle. Just as the expressions on the two's faces became wild with joy, on the other side of Qing and Prefectural City, looking at the gradually darkening sky, Master Fang's face was full of anxiety and worry. Chapter 48. Fang searched the entire Qing and prefecture but did not find any trace of Li Yi. "Fang Lao San, you fool. Isn't the son-in-law with you? You've lost him." Another man beside Fang looked equally anxious. "I don't know. I just went to the bathroom and when I came back, the son-in-law was gone," Fang said helplessly. Even he couldn't understand. How could such a grown man like the son-in-law go missing just like that? "If the son-in-law really can't be found, I'll see how you're going to explain it to Miss." The man beside him glared at him and said, "Do you think the son-in-law ran away?" At this moment, a hint of hesitation appeared on the other man's face and he spoke hesitantly. "Nonsense." Hearing this, the man surnamed Fang was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He turned his head abruptly and looked at him with an unfriendly gaze. He reprimanded, "The son-in-law is not that kind of person." "Fang." The man who reprimanded the man surnamed Fang spoke in a low voice and said slowly, "What old Wu said is not impossible. After all, the son-in-law," he did not finish his sentence but everyone understood what he meant. After all, the son-in-law was snatched. Although during this period of time, almost everyone had deliberately ignored this fact, it was still an undeniable fact. Because of the appearance of Li Yi, their lives had long been turned upside down. No one was willing to mention that matter. From the bottom of their hearts, they had already regarded Li Yi as one of their own. However, no matter how unwilling they were to admit it, at this moment, everyone could not help but think of a certain worst possibility. "Everyone, let's split up and search again. Where could the son-in-law be waiting for us?" After a moment, a resolute expression appeared on the face of the man surnamed Fang. He gritted his teeth and said in a low voice. The rest of them looked at each other and could only sigh. They dispersed and began another round of searching. Li Yi was not a medical student. If the princess had any other illness, he, who had not digested a medical book, naturally had no right to speak. But when it came to treating gastrointestinal problems and indigestion, he could be considered half an expert. In his previous life, in order to adjust his stomach, his mother had used all kinds of methods. At that time, Li Yi did not care much about it. Now that he thought about it, each and every one of them was clearly imprinted in his mind, as if they were carved into his memory. Li Yi did not give them a long lecture on modern medical theories and directly said, "Other than using red fruits and sugar to stir-fry candied haws, you can crush corn and yam together and boil it into porridge. It will also have a miraculous effect on treating Wang Fei's illness." Stir-fried hawthorn with sugar and yam porridge were common dishes on Li Yi's dining table. There was no digestive aid in this world. Hawthorn could only be used as an appetizer. When the appetite was good, the body would naturally be better. The pretty servant girl and the young prince listened attentively. Li Yi continued, "Every day after dinner, Wang Fei can take a walk in the garden for an hour. It will also help to alleviate the illness. In addition, there is one more thing to remember. For this period of time, Wang Fei's diet should be light. You must not eat meat or fish all day. Try to avoid greasy food, such as..." At this point in Li Yi's speech, the young man hurriedly ordered the few cooks, "Did you all hear that? Remove all the greasy dishes I mentioned. That's about all I know. After speaking for so long, Li Yi could not help but feel a little thirsty. His eyes inadvertently glanced out of the window and found that the sky had completely darkened. Yanji, do you remember everything I said? The young man turned to the young girl and asked. Hearing this, Yanji nodded. Young prince, I have remembered everything. Even the imperial physicians were helpless. This handsome scholar in front of them was their only hope. If Li Yi was giving them a prescription, they would definitely carefully consider it. But he did not mention anything from the beginning to the end. Most of it was a change in the diet. Although they did not understand the reason, it seemed that he did not speak without thinking. It is getting late. I have told you everything I know. I will not disturb you anymore. With the 10 taels of silver already in his pocket, Li Yi very timely said his goodbyes. If he was any later, Fong and the others would be anxious to death. The young man did not know whether Li Yi's method was effective or not. But the appearance of the candied hawthorn had indeed improved his mother's condition. For this, he had to owe Li Yi a favor. Putting an arm around Li Yi's shoulder, he said, Brother, you have helped me so much. If I do not thank you properly, I will feel very sorry. How about this, we will hold a banquet in the Jade Courtyard tonight. We will not stop until we are drunk. During this period of time, his mother's illness had almost become a sore point in his heart. Now that he had seen endless hope, he was extremely carefree. There is no need for a banquet. I have urgent matters to attend to at home. Hey, brother, this is not right. Are you looking down on me? I do not mean that, then follow me. The young girl named Yanji watched the young prince and the scholar leave with their arms around each other's shoulders. Her pretty face could not help but show a trace of a smile. This young prince of her family was good at everything except for the fact that he did not have any arrogance. He looked like a playboy. If he were to inherit the throne in the future, the young girl really could not imagine what kind of situation it would be. This thought only appeared in her mind for a moment, and she hurriedly left the kitchen. Although she remembered everything that the scholar had said just now, it was hard to guarantee that she would not forget it in the future. It was better to find a piece of paper and write it down quickly. Li Yi was hurriedly dragged out of the prince's mansion by the young prince who did not look like a young prince at all. Outside the Willow Leaf village, the big man surnamed Fong walked into the village in a daze with a blank face. The few men behind him also looked worried. On the other side of the village, the young servant girl was busy in the kitchen. She was humming a little song that the son-in-law taught her. It was unknown what she was thinking, but the corners of her mouth slightly curled up and her 2 black eyebrows curved into a beautiful arc. It is almost the Mid-Autumn Festival. When the son-in-law comes back, it is time to make some mooncakes. The young servant girl murmured. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door in the courtyard. The son-in-law is back. The young girl's face lit up with joy. She ran out of the kitchen with light steps, crossed the courtyard, and opened the door. When she saw the familiar face of Fong, the smile on her pretty face became even wider. Uncle Fong, you are back. After looking around, she found that other than the big man surnamed Fong and the others, there was no sign of Li Yi. A trace of doubt appeared on the young girl's pretty face, and she asked, Where is the son-in-law? Fong raised his head and looked at Xiao Huan with a complicated expression. After a long time, he opened his mouth with some difficulty. The son-in-law is missing. What? The young girl's delicate body shook when she heard this. After she recovered, her pretty face immediately became pale. People who wandered around in Jianghu used an alternate name to save their lives. When they visited a brothel, they still used the title of Little Prince. If this was spread out, their prince's father would probably break their legs. By the way, I still don't know this brother's name, Li Xian suddenly asked after taking 2 steps. Li Yi. Li Yi looked around curiously and whispered. After living for 2 lifetimes, this was the first time he had visited a brothel. He was a little excited. Brother, your surname is also Li. What a coincidence. Li Xian said in surprise. Although this guy was quite handsome, Li Yi still didn't want to have any fate with him. As soon as the two of them stepped into the jade courtyard, a woman in her 30s with heavy makeup immediately greeted them. She squeezed out a smile and said, "Hey, isn't this Li? You haven't been here for a long time." Li Yi was stunned for a moment before he realized that the madam wasn't talking about him. Then, he looked at Li Xian with a surprised expression. So this guy was actually a regular here. At this time, Li Yi couldn't help but have some doubts in his heart. Was this guy really a young lord? Don't say anything unnecessary. Where is Miss Suemo? Hurry up and call her out. Li Xian waved his hand and threw her a silver ingot. He said impatiently. Li Yi turned to look at him. Didn't he say that he would treat her to a meal? How did it become a brothel to sleep with girls? His chastity of 2 lifetimes couldn't be casually given away here. If this guy made any unhealthy suggestions later, he must refuse without hesitation. The madam caught the silver and was slightly happy. But then she said with a troubled expression, Li, you know that Zuemo is our top artist here. It's up to her whether she sees guests or not. I can't force her. Li Xian frowned when he heard this. He hated people who didn't do anything after receiving the silver. Seeing this, the madam hurriedly changed the topic and said, however, Zuemo's program is about to start. Why don't I ask her after her program is over? Li Xian waved his hand and said, forget it. I just want her to sing a song to liven things up. Since she is going on stage in a while, it will save me the trouble. The madam muttered in her heart. Every time this Li came to the jade courtyard, he didn't look for a girl. He just wanted to listen to Zuemo sing. It was really strange. However, she didn't dare to say this out loud. After all, this was her financial backer. A thick smile immediately appeared on her face, and she called out, "Gentlemen, please follow me to the private room. Drunken Mo will be here soon." The private room that the madam mentioned was a relatively spacious room. The floor was covered with a clean carpet, and there was a space in the middle separated by a curtain. After the madam led Li Yi and Zuemo to sit down, she excused herself and went to work. In front of the two of them was a long, short table. Chapter 50. Li Yi was very sure that although poetry also existed in this world, it was only in the same form. Great writers such as Li Bai, Du Fu, Su Shi, and Lu Yong did not exist in the original world. Of course, their works would not appear in this world either. Translator, Lon_editor, Effidacial Li Yi was shocked when he heard the poem, which shouldn't have existed in this world. Then, his shock turned into ecstasy. Could it be that the other party had also transmigrated to this world like him? No one could understand Li Yi's feelings. He was a lonely soul drifting alone in this world. Even if there was a person, no, even if it was a dog from the same world as him, it would still bring the greatest comfort to his soul. Li Xian, who was enjoying the song and dance, did not notice that Li Yi had become very excited. He abruptly stood up and strode to the center of the stage, pulling aside the veil. The woman who was singing with her face covered by a veil seemed to be frightened. Her voice came to an abrupt stop. She looked at the young scholar who had suddenly rushed over with an excited expression. A trace of panic appeared on her face under the veil. Did you also transmigrate from the earth? Li Yi grabbed the woman's hand and asked anxiously. At this moment, everyone in the surroundings had recovered from their shock. When everyone saw what was happening, they immediately stood up, and expressions of shock and anger appeared on their faces. Stop! Let go of Miss Zomo. Who dares to make trouble in this jade courtyard? The young prince, Li Xian, was also stunned, not knowing what was going on. This guy is so impatient. Let go of me, you lecher. When the woman's hand was grabbed by Li Yi, she was really frightened. She stood there in a daze and didn't move at all. However, when she came back to her senses, she suddenly shook off his hand. A look of shame and anger appeared on her face. She took a few steps back and looked at him as she scolded. Li Yi stood there in a daze. Things seemed to be different from what he had imagined. Looking at the girl's reaction, could it be that he had guessed wrong? Right at this moment, the madam ran in with a few strong men, and she cursed furiously. Who the hell is so ignorant to actually dare to cause trouble in the Jade Field courtyard? Quickly arrest him. Those men saw Li Yi standing in the middle of the stage at a glance. They strode over and pressed down on his shoulders. Li Yi allowed the two men to pin his hands behind his back as he glared at the woman. Where did you learn that immortal magpie bridge song? The woman didn't want to pay attention to him, but when she saw the crazed look in his eyes, her heart couldn't help but tremble. For some reason, she opened her mouth and explained, this poem has been known to everyone since a month ago. It is said that it was written on the sky prayer lantern by a gifted scholar named Li Yi. A fat shopkeeper came over and looked at Li Yi with a smile. Young master, our strongest wine here is too strong. Ordinary people, cut the crap. Are you afraid that I can't afford it? Paw. A silver ingot had been slapped on the table by Li Yi. Okay, wait a moment, young master, the wine will be here soon. When the shopkeeper saw the silver ingot, his eyes lit up and he hurried to the counter to get the wine. Li Xian walked in from outside and sat opposite to Li Yi. He looked at him and sighed, no matter how beautiful that Miss Zuamo is, she is just a prostitute. Brother Li is a capable man, why do you insist on being a prostitute? Although they had only had 2 short interactions, it was obvious that this little prince had already developed a lot of interest in Li Yi. If it weren't for this, with his identity, no matter how much he lowered his status, how could he call an ordinary person brother? Sir, your wine is here. Li Xian obviously misunderstood, but Li Yi didn't want to explain. When the shopkeeper put the wine on the table, he picked up the jar and took a big gulp. Plop. Before falling on the table, Li Yi finally understood why he didn't drink before. Seeing this, Li Xian was stunned for a moment, and then laughed out loud. I didn't expect your alcohol tolerance to be so poor. He grabbed the jar of wine that Li Yi had just drunk from with one hand and gulped it down a few mouthfuls. Plop. The two of them leaned on the table in the same posture. When the shopkeeper saw this scene at the counter, he couldn't help but curl his lips. You have such a poor alcohol tolerance, but you still dare to ask for the strongest wine. You deserve it. At the corner of a street not far from the wine shop, a few figures dressed in coarse clothes walked out from the darkness when they saw the two people lying drunk on the table in the wine shop. The corners of their mouths pulled into a bitter smile as they walked out. Chapter 51. When he regained consciousness a little, he felt that his whole head was swollen. He tried hard for a long time, but he couldn't open his eyes. He could only hear a few intermittent voices around him. Wang Fei actually ate something in the morning. She also specially drank a small bowl of yam and corn porridge. Wang Ye was very happy. He increased everyone's allowance in the kitchen. When he finally opened his eyes, he felt that his mouth was unusually bitter and thirsty. At this time, a clear voice sounded not far away. Young master is awake. A hot towel was handed over. Li Yi carelessly wiped his face. He looked at the two maids standing in the room and said in a hoarse voice, "Water." A moment later, he took the teacup from the maid's hand and drank it in one gulp. He still didn't feel thirsty. After drinking a few cups, the feeling of thirst subsided a lot. At this time, a maid came over with a tray covered with a red cloth. She said with a smile, "Young master, this is a thank you gift that Wang Ye asked me to prepare for you. Please accept it." "Thank you gift. What is it?" Li Yi had just woken up and his mind was not very clear. He casually removed the red cloth and was almost dazzled by the neat silver ingots on the tray. "Thank Wang Ye for me." Li Yi took the tray from the maid's hand with a face full of smiles. The trace of drowsiness was immediately swept away and he looked much more energetic. The maid was stunned when she heard this. It seemed that she didn't think that Li Yi would agree so readily. Just now, Wang Ye specifically told her that if the other party insisted on not accepting it, she must persuade him to accept it. For this, she had made a little preparation in her heart. But the real situation made her a little dazed. Didn't they say that scholars regarded money as dirt? This young master didn't seem to be like this. Li Yi carried a small bag on his back and walked out of Ning Wang Fu. He waved to the woman called Yanji behind him and strode away. Last night, he drank a mouthful of wine and was drunk on the table. It was so shameful. He did not wait for the young prince to wake up and could not wait to leave the prince's mansion. There was a total of 110 taels of silver in the small bag he was carrying on his back. Although it was only about 50,000 renminbi, this was indeed the first large sum of money that Li Yi had received since he came to this era. The son of a nouveau riche must have a nouveau riche father. Li Yi liked this kind of forthright prince. It was too troublesome to talk about feelings. It was better to directly talk about money. His wallet was bulging, and even his heart was filled. He just didn't know how anxious Fang and the others would be when they didn't see him yesterday. It was better to return to the stronghold as soon as possible. In the willow leaf stockade, the little servant girl sat in front of the door. Her eyes were red and swollen. Chapter 52. As a commoner who was afraid of poverty and starvation, Fang couldn't help but want to convert the silver into grain when he saw it. This had already become his instinctive reaction. But this time, when he saw the fist-sized silver ingots on the ground, Fang felt that his brain wasn't enough to process it. How much grain could this amount of silver buy was clearly beyond the scope of Fang's understanding, since his IQ was limited to adding and subtracting 10. "Son-in-law, what did you do last night?" Old Fang forcefully shifted his gaze away from the alluring silver ingots. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva with difficulty and looked at Li Yi as he asked. Li Yi glared at the careless maidservant girl and bent over to pick up the silver ingots on the ground one by one. He placed them in his bag and then raised his head to say, "I got lost last night and picked them up on the road." Picked them up. Fang's voice was trembling. This was almost 100 taels of silver. He wouldn't be able to earn so much money in his entire life, yet it was so casually picked up by the son-in-law. Even if he earned 100 copper coins a day from selling candied haws for the past few days, and he could get half of it, it would take several years for him to save up so much money without eating or drinking. As for the young maidservant girl, her beautiful big eyes sparkled with little stars. The son-in-law's luck had always been good. Every time he went out, he would always pick up something. Although it had been a long time since he had picked up a pheasant, he had picked up so much silver this time. Even the heavens were helping the son-in-law. The young maiden's mood had experienced great ups and downs overnight. At this moment, her heart was filled with joy. She secretly looked at Li Yi and couldn't bear to look away. Seeing Li Yi and the others walk into the courtyard, Madame Wu stood there in a daze. She felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Until now, she still couldn't believe what she had just seen. That's a lot of shiny silver. She probably wouldn't be able to see so much silver in her next life. For those poorer families who still had to fill their stomachs, their annual expenses were only about 1 tael of silver. That amount of silver was enough for them to spend for the rest of their lives. After an unknown amount of time, Madame Wu finally recovered from her daze. She picked up the copper basin from the ground and walked into the room in a daze with an unknown expression on her face. 100 taels of silver was not a small sum, and how to spend it was still a problem. Naturally, Li Yi would not be like Fang and the others. The first thing he thought of when he had money was to buy food. Under the situation where there was no shortage of food at home, what he needed to consider was of course how to make the most of the money, how to use the 100 taels of silver to make more money. After all, no one could guarantee that he would always meet a rich man like Prince Ning and his son. Silver was common, but tycoons were rare. If he wanted to earn enough money to enjoy his old age, he had to rely on himself. Originally, he wanted to slowly accumulate enough money through the candied haws, but changes often came faster than he planned. Now that he had some assets, he could obviously skip this step. However, the candied haws business still had to continue. At least in the short term, there was still a lot of profit to be made from the candied haws without any market competition. Of course, there was another important reason. Although the money was nothing to him, it was enough to change the lives of Fang and the others for the rest of their lives. Li Yi did not want to lead the entire village out of poverty and become rich, but Fang and the others were his people. He couldn't just watch them eat dirt while he lived a luxurious life. Li Yi's only dream at this stage was to earn money, a lot of money. At least, it would be enough for him to retire for the rest of his life. As for the specific amount of money, Li Yi did not have a number in his mind. In short, the more the better. With a starting capital of 100 taels, according to Li Yi's previous plan, he could consider purifying high alcohol content or making soap to make money. Before distillation and purification was invented, the alcohol content in this world was actually very low. Most of the rice wine was below 10 degrees, and the highest was no more than 20 degrees. It was only under this premise that it was possible to not get drunk after 1,000 cups. If it was the white wine with 50 to 60 degrees in the future, those so-called wine heroes would have died of alcohol poisoning many times before they could drink 1,000 cups. The alcohol content of the wine that the shopkeeper brought out last night should not be very high. How could it encounter someone like Li Yi who would faint at the slightest smell of alcohol? He was knocked out in one gulp after drinking it. The wine culture was also very prosperous in this world. The higher the alcohol content of the wine, the more they sought after it. Presumably, this would also be an unimpeded way to make money. The sterilization and disinfection of wounds also required high alcohol content. Li Yi still cherished his life very much. If a modern person died from an infected wound in the future, it would be a great shame. Apart from distilling the alcohol, the production of soap had to be put on the agenda as soon as possible. The legendary thing called pancreas, which was used for bathing, was also very rare in this world. Li Yi had specially looked for it in the market of the prefectural city, but he did not see anyone selling it. After asking, he found out that the production method of pancreas was very complicated. The secret recipe was also in the hands of the royal family and very few people. It was a luxury that only a few people could use, and it was basically impossible to see it in the market. Even if it did appear, it would be quickly bought at a high price. Something that couldn't be more ordinary in the future had immediately become a luxury in this world. This was naturally a good thing for Li Yi. In the past, he had also personally DIY handmade soap with the mentality of playing around. It did not require many materials, and the process was also not complicated. Even now, he still remembered the production method. The simplest handmade soap could be made with water, vegetable oil, and sodium hydroxide. The soap made with this method did not contain any additives, had a strong ability to remove dirt, and did not cause any harm to the human skin. Although there was no ready-made sodium hydroxide, it could be easily produced with slaked lime and soda ash. There was no difficulty. After thinking about it in his heart, Li Yi decided to start with handmade soap. He had really had enough of the days where he had to rely on his hands to bathe. As he was thinking about how to carry out this plan, he unknowingly walked into the inner courtyard. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound. Li Yi raised his head and saw a graceful figure moving around in the courtyard. A long sword that shone with a cold light was as agile as a snake. Seeing Lu Rui draw a beautiful flower with the sword and jump several feet away, Li Yi's heart was filled with extreme envy. If he could also have such skills, would he still be afraid of being bullied? If he encountered that scar-faced man again, he could easily deal with him by himself. At that time, with his extraordinary skills and pretty face, wouldn't he be able to become a handsome man with both the pen and the sword, easily gain a large group of female fans, and easily reach the peak of life? Looking at Li Yi's face from afar, Lu Rui sheathed his long sword and resisted the urge to kill him with one strike. Why? Li Yi was stunned when he heard that, but he still said honestly, I just want to practice martial arts. I've admired martial artists since I was young, but I never had the chance to practice. No. To Li Yi's surprise, Lu Rui shook her head quickly. Why? It was his turn to be confused. Your aptitude is too low, Lu Rui said bluntly. Li Yi was stunned when he heard that, then he felt indignant. He was a transmigrator after all, and he had the halo of a protagonist. He was destined to be the man who changed the world, and he would succeed no matter what he did. He just wanted to practice martial arts, but he was told that his aptitude was too low. That didn't fit the plot of a protagonist at all. However, it was impossible for him to give up just like that. A thought flashed through his mind, and he looked at Lu Rui and said, Why don't we make a bet? No. Lu Rui said straightforwardly, and Li Yi's words were stuck in his throat. Li Yi looked at her angrily. She always didn't play by the rules. Could they still have a pleasant conversation? If I lose, I'll give you 50 taels of silver. If you lose, you have to teach me martial arts. Li Yi didn't care whether she rejected it or not. He really didn't believe that Lu Rui could resist the temptation of 50 taels of silver. Sure enough, after hearing Li Yi's bet, Lu Rui raised her eyebrows, and she seemed to be tempted. 50 taels of silver was indeed not a small amount of money for her, and she could buy many things she wanted. She had never had so much money in her life. However, she also knew that since Li Yi said that, he must have the confidence to win. Based on her understanding of Li Yi, he wouldn't do things that he wasn't confident about. Li Yi knew what she was thinking at a glance. He smiled and said, Don't worry. I won't ask you to recite poems or paint, and I won't ask you to do anything difficult. After saying that, he stood up and picked up 2 stones of different sizes from the corner of the yard. He held them in his hands and raised his arms to the same height. He looked at Lu Rui and said, You just need to guess which of these 2 stones will fall first when I let go. If you guess right, I lose, and I'll give you the 50 taels of silver. If you guess wrong, you must fulfill your promise and teach me martial arts. The bet was very simple, but when Li Yi said it, Lu Rui still had some doubts in her heart. Of course, she didn't doubt herself, but she doubted Li Yi's intelligence. When 2 stones fell from the same height, it was common knowledge that the heavier one would fall first. Was there a need to bet? This bet was a situation where she would definitely win. If it wasn't for the elusive smile on Li Yi's face, Lu Rui would have suspected that he was really out of his mind and wanted to give her 50 taels of silver for nothing. She didn't worry that Li Yi would play any tricks. At such a close distance, no matter what Li Yi did, he wouldn't be able to escape her eyes. What, do you dare to bet? Li Yi looked at Lu Rui and said provocatively. Why not? Lu Rui glanced at him and said lightly. She couldn't lose this bet no matter what. Why would she go against the money? Let's make a promise. Li Yi put down the stone and raised his hand. Clap. Lu Rui frowned, but she still reached out her hand and gave him a high five. Let's begin. I'm guessing that the stone in your left hand will fall first. Lu Rui was referring to the bigger stone. Don't rush. Li Yi didn't start immediately. He said with a serious face, I have to get Xiao Huan to witness it. Otherwise, if you go back on your words, who am I going to talk to? Lu Rui couldn't suppress the urge to slash him with her sword again. After a while, the servant girl stood beside them. She looked at Li Yi, then at Lu Rui and said, Young master, second miss, we can start now. After that, she focused all her attention on Li Yi's hands. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart. Young master's 50 taels of silver was probably going to be gone this time. Even Xiao Huan knew that the big stone would fall first. How could second miss be wrong? Watch carefully. Li Yi raised his arms to the same height and revealed an unnoticeable smile. He let go of his hands and the 2 stones fell to the ground. Bang! 2 stones fell from the sky and hit the bluestone slabs, making only a single sound. How is this possible? Upon seeing this scene, Lu Rui could not help but exclaim in astonishment. Chapter 54. That's impossible. Lu Rui's eyes widened. She was no longer as calm as before as she shook her head. The young maidservant beside her also opened her mouth in shock. She was not any less surprised than Lu Rui. When falling from the same height, a heavy object would definitely fall before a light object. This was a concept that had been deeply ingrained in their minds for more than 10 years. However, the 2 of them clearly saw that the 2 stones of different sizes had clearly fallen at the same time. You must be cheating. Lu Rui looked up at Li Yi and said with certainty. I knew you'd say that. Li Yi shrugged and said nonchalantly, try it yourself if you don't believe me. If the law of free fall could produce a different result from Lu Rui's hands, then it would not matter even if he lost 50 taels of silver to her. In another world, Aristotle once proposed the conclusion that heavier objects fall faster, with his enigmatic self-confidence, which dominated the Western academic world for nearly 2,000 years. One day 2,000 years later, Galileo walked up to the Leaning Tower of Pisa and threw 2 iron balls of different weights down. He proved the law of free fall with the 2 balls experiment. Similarly, in the current world, the principle that could be understood with a small experiment was also not discovered because of the ancient people's taken-for-granted concept. Lu Rui picked up another 2 stones to experiment with. When she saw the 2 stones fall to the ground at the same time in her hands, she was stunned. Then, she clenched her teeth and said, Xiao Huan, try it. The reason why the law was a law was that it would not change due to objective conditions. Lu Rui was destined to fail if she wanted to challenge the law of nature. Why? Why is it like this? From afar, Li Yi felt a little guilty as he watched Lu Rui mutter those words in a daze. It was as though the worldview she had built up over a long period of time was beginning to crumble. Was it too despicable to use such a method to deceive a weak lady? No, his sister-in-law was not a weak woman. If such a woman could become a weak woman, then the world would have been ruled by women long ago. You lost the bet. Can you teach me martial arts now? Li Yi walked over and said to Lu Rui with a smile. Why? Lu Rui looked up at him and asked through gritted teeth, why did the 2 stones fall to the ground at the same time? For the current her, winning or losing was not important. What was important was that the creed that had existed in her heart over the years had undergone an earth-shattering change. She needed to know the reason behind it. Xiao Huan also stared wide-eyed at Li Yi, her big eyes filled with the light of curiosity. It was indeed difficult for Li Yi to explain the origin of the law of free fall. Basic physics had not yet been established in this world, and it would be even more troublesome to explain the knowledge of acceleration to them. He thought about it and said, you can think of it as saying that the speed of the falling stone has nothing to do with the weight of the stone. No matter how different the weight of the two stones is, if they fall from the same height, they will always hit the ground at the same time. This explanation was actually the same as no explanation at all. You only know part of it, don't you? After listening to Li Yi's explanation, Lu Rui looked at him with disdain. As a good young man who had received higher education, how could he be looked down upon by an ignorant woman in a feudal society? Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Do you know where the river flows from the back of the mountain?" "Nonsense, of course it flows down the mountain," Lu Rui said bluntly. "Why?" Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Why does the river always flow down the mountain and not up the mountain?" "Because." Lu Rui subconsciously opened her mouth to explain. However, the moment she said that word, she was unable to continue. Water flows from a high place to a low place. Was there a need for a reason? Li Yi's questions did not stop there. Why do the leaves on the tree always fall to the ground and not fly to the sky? Why can I see my own shadow in the water? Why are the colors of the rainbow after the rain always red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple? One question after another came out of Li Yi's mouth like a machine gun. Lu Rui opened her mouth for a moment and then closed it again. She was completely stunned. In autumn, the leaves on the tree would fall to the ground, one could see their own shadow in the water, and the order of the colors of the rainbow. Weren't these things natural? Did these need to be explained? But, why? Lu Rui and Xiao Huan stood in the courtyard and questions began to appear in their minds. Li Yi's words seemed to have opened the door to a new world for them. It turned out that these small things that they did not pay attention to were not as simple as they seemed. Even in the small things, there is a great knowledge hidden. And in this world, not every problem has an explanation. Li Yi felt a slight sense of achievement as he enlightened the two of them on natural science for free. "Young master, why are these things?" The little servant girl looked up at Li Yi and asked in a daze. Li Yi, since she was willing to bet, she had to be willing to accept her loss. Second Miss Lu's character was still very trustworthy. In the inner courtyard, Li Yi sat on a stone bench and looked at Lu Rui, who was obviously unhappy. He asked excitedly, "Do you know the 18 dragon subduing palms?" "What's the 18 dragon subduing palms?" Lu Rui frowned and asked. "It's the world's most ferocious palm technique. There's a dragon's roar when it's used. The wonders of the palm technique are unparalleled in the world," Li Yi explained with glowing eyes. "I've never heard of it," Lu Rui said lightly. "What about the six-pulse magical sword?" "Gather all the vital qi at the tip of the finger and release it through the air. It can seal the enemy's acupoints at close range and injure people with qi from afar. It's the world's top exquisite sword technique." "I've never heard of it." "Have you heard of the wave-like subtle steps? After mastering it, your body will be as light as a swallow. You can run on walls and walk on water." "I've never heard of this either." "Then you must have heard of Tai Chi. It's used to defeat the strong with the weak, overcome the strong with softness, complement each other with softness, borrow strength to fight strength, and move 1,000 pounds with little effort." After Li Yi finished, Lu Rui looked at him with a frown and said, "I've never heard of anyone in Jianghu who has mastered the wonderful martial arts you mentioned. The 18 dragon subduing palms, the 6-pulse divine sword, the Tai Chi fist. According to what you said, even one of these supreme martial arts is enough to dominate Jianghu. However, no one in Jianghu can do any of them. Let's not talk about other things for now. Just the release of true qi alone is something that even a grandmaster expert would not be able to do." "Ah, there's none of these." Li Yi's face showed an unconcealable disappointment. After all this time, the so-called martial arts masters in this world were not just a little bit different from the masters in old Master Jin's martial arts world. "Where did you hear about these martial arts?" Lu Rui looked up at him with a hint of doubt in her beautiful eyes. "It's a long story," Tell me about it for now. Alright. Li thought for a moment and said, it said that in the Southern Song dynasty, in the last years of the previous dynasty, there were 5 supreme martial arts masters in Jianghu. They fought on the top of Mount Hua for the 9-yin manual, the world's best martial arts book. The battle lasted for 7 days and 7 nights, until the sun and the moon lost their light and the sky lost their color. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.